The first thing you notice when you walk into Broken Trust Beer Garden is the neon. It washes over you before you even smell the hops or hear the clink of glasses. The entire ceiling is a canopy of glass tubes, buzzing just at the edge of human hearing. 63 vintage signs, all running on dedicated circuits I installed myself. A 1952 Schlitz globe blinks lazily in one corner. An animated roadrunner from a Texas motel races across a dusty sunset. A massive double cola clock that weighs 114 pounds hangs over the dartboards. And above the 40-foot bar, wired to a dimmer so I can control the exact milliamps flowing through it, is the crown jewel. A 1949 Pabst Blue Ribbon waterfall sign with hand-bent letters, so delicately ribbed they look like they were frozen mid-pour. Every Saturday at noon, the lunch crowd goes quiet because they know what's coming. A man in a county-issued safety vest pushes through the kitchen door, carrying a bucket of glass cleaner and a stack of microfiber cloths. He climbs a ladder under the watchful eye of a probation officer who sits at table 7 with a club soda and a crossword. He unhooks the Pabst sign, sets it gently on a rubber mat on the bar top, and begins polishing each inch of its porcelain face and every twisting glass channel, while everyone watches and a few people applaud. That man is my twin brother Marcus. He does this because a judge ordered him to. 7 years of 8-hour Saturdays, and every time I see his reflection in that glass, I remember the smell of ozone and burning flux the day our father died, and the forged signature on a bill of sale that started everything. This is the story of how my brother sold my inheritance out from under me for $90,000 and put my name on the crime, and how I turned his betrayal into a beer garden where every sign is a witness, and the betrayer never gets a day off. My name is Lena. I'm 38 years old now, but 4 years ago I was 34 and I was an electrician by trade, same as my father Henry. I spent my 20s wiring industrial control panels at a textile plant, running rigid conduit through steam tunnels, reading ladder logic diagrams until my eyes crossed. But when Dad's hands started trembling and the doctors said early onset Parkinson's, I walked away from my union journeyman's card and moved back into the 2-story Craftsman on Sycamore Street where I grew up. I took over the family business, which was not a business in any normal sense. It was neon. Real, honest, hand-blown neon. The kind where you start with a straight glass tube, heat it over a crossfire burner until it glows butter yellow, and then you puff a breath through a rubber hose to form a bubble, and you twist and bend that glowing worm into script letters against a pattern drawn on sheet asbestos. You weld electrodes onto each end, you pump the tube down to a near vacuum, you bombard it with 20,000 volts of current to drive out every impurity, and then you backfill it with noble gas and a droplet of mercury and seal it off with a torch. The color you get depends on the gas and the phosphor coating. Neon alone glows deep red, argon with mercury gives a cold blue, krypton a silvery white. My father Henry built his workshop in the garage before I was born. He spent 40 years restoring and collecting the great American roadside signs, the glowing advertisements for beer and gasoline and roadside motels that once lined every highway. He had a complete dog-and-pony show of animals, palm trees, and one massive Texaco star that weighed more than a Chevy small block. Every sign had a provenance he documented in spiral notebooks, and every restoration took months of his obsessive patience. He taught me everything. By the time I was 12, I could pump a bombarder and read a milliammeter on a vintage tube to within 0.5%. By 20, I could tell a cold cathode tube from the 1930 by the flicker of its startup, and I knew that a sign running even 2 milliamps too high would burn out its electrodes within a year. Marcus never learned any of that. He called the collection dusty old junk. He left for college, got a real estate license, married a woman named Camille who used the word curate as a verb and thought manual labor was something other people did. They visited Dad on Christmas and Father's Day if the drive wasn't too long. That is the only background that matters, because the turning point happened on an August afternoon when I found my father slumped over his workbench with a half-finished Coors script still clamped in the ribbon burner, its electrode glowing weak orange like a dying heartbeat. The aneurysm hit him like a breaker tripping. No warning, no goodbye. I was in the kitchen making lemonade when I heard no sound, just a sudden absence of the hiss of the burner, and I walked in and saw him. I called 911. I held his hand while the paramedics worked, but I knew the moment I saw his face that he was already gone. I made all the calls, the funeral home, his few remaining friends, the lawyer, and then I called Marcus. His first words were not what happened, or how are you, but did he leave a will? I told him there was one in the safe. He said he'd be there in 3 hours. He and Camille pulled up in a polished BMW that smelled of leather conditioner, Camille already dressed in a black crepe dress that looked like it cost more than my mortgage payment. They walked through the door, and within 10 minutes Camille was photographing the living room with her phone, not because she was grieving, but because she was inventorying. Marcus stood over the open safe reading the will like a man checking a restaurant bill for errors. The will was simple. My father left everything to me and Marcus jointly, with a specific codicil that the neon sign collection was to be preserved intact, never sold piecemeal, and if either of us wanted to sell, we had to have the other's notarized consent. Attached was a certified appraisal from 2 years prior, valuing the collection at $245,000. I watched Marcus's eyes track that number, his pupils narrowing like a camera aperture. He didn't say anything, just folded the will and said, "We'll discuss logistics after the funeral." The funeral was small. Afterwards, I walked into the workshop to clean off the bench, trying not to cry into my father's old coffee mug. That was when I found it. Behind a panel of pegboard under the main workbench, there was a small metal lockbox the size of a shoebox, painted olive drab with a simple combination lock. My father had shown me that hiding spot when I was 12, said it was where he kept his emergency vocabulary, his joke for things he never wanted to say aloud. I'd forgotten about it entirely. I slid it out, dust coating my fingers, and was turning the combination to 4-12-36, his birthday backwards, when Marcus walked in. He saw the box and his face tightened. "What's that, some old junk? Just toss it, Lena. We've got to clear this place out so we can list the house." The real estate agent said clutter kills curb appeal. He reached down, picked up the box, and actually threw it toward a pile of scrap metal near the garage door, the sound of it clattering against a bent conduit loud in the quiet space. Then he turned and walked back into the house, already on his phone with an auction liquidator. I waited until his voice faded, then retrieved the box. The lid was dented, but the latch still held. I opened it. Inside was a single piece of yellow legal paper, folded in thirds, the handwriting on it my father's. Shaky from Parkinson's, but legible. It read, "Lena, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Do not trust your brother with the collection. He has already tried to borrow against its value twice, once through a pawn shop and once through a private lender I happen to know. I stopped him both times. He will try to sell it the minute I'm dead. Protect it. It is your future, not his. He will smile and call it family, but he will rob you blind. Save yourself. I love you. Dad." I read it 3 times, the paper trembling in my hands. Then I folded it, tucked it into my back pocket, and walked out of that garage knowing the vultures were already circling and that I was the only one who could stop them. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that blood doesn't excuse betrayal, and that sometimes the family you build for yourself is more reliable than the one you're born into. Now, back to the moment the manipulation began. That evening, Marcus and Camille sat me down in the living room with an air of practiced sympathy that I now recognize as the opening act of a financial grift. Camille poured me a glass of Chardonnay I didn't want, swirling it in a crystal glass she'd clearly brought from their house because my father didn't own crystal. Marcus laid a document on the coffee table. It was a bill of sale, already drafted, for the entire neon sign collection, to a private for-profit attraction 200 miles north called the American Roadside Heritage Museum. The sale price was $90,000. I stared at the number. $90,000. The appraisal was much higher. Marcus nodded with a sad, patient expression, the kind a parent gives a child who doesn't understand economics. "I know, Lena, but the market's soft right now. Vintage neon is a niche thing, and frankly most of these signs need major electrical work. I talked to a dealer who said the whole lot is basically a liability. The museum made an offer, and it's the best we're going to get. If we don't take it, we'll have to pay storage, insurance, maybe even EPA disposal fees for the old mercury-filled tubes. This way we get cash, clean and fast. Split it right down the middle. $45,000 each. You can pay off the mortgage, take a vacation somewhere warm." It's what Dad would have wanted, honestly, to not be a burden. Camille reached over and squeezed my hand, her nails like acrylic talons. We're just trying to take care of you, sweetie. You've been so strong through all of this. Let us handle the heavy lifting. You deserve to rest. I looked at the bill of sale. At the bottom, a signature line for me, printed with my full legal name. I stalled, said I needed time to think, that I was exhausted. Marcus's jaw tightened. A micro flinch I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been looking. He nodded. Over the next 48 hours, they never stopped. They talked about how the museum was a perfect home for the signs, how they'd have a whole wing and a plaque honoring Dad's memory, how the money was secure and sitting in an escrow account waiting for my signature. I was grieving, I was exhausted, and a part of me desperately wanted to believe my twin brother could not possibly be as cruel as that handwritten note warned. So I said okay. I said I'd sign if they handled all the logistics. Marcus produced a document he called a sale authorization, a single page that stated I agreed to the sale and authorized him as co-owner to execute it. I didn't notice that it was a photocopy, that the notary block was already stamped with a raised seal but had no date filled in, and that it was a completely separate document from the actual bill of sale he would file with the museum. I signed it in a daze while Camille chattered about how spacious their guest apartment was and how I should come stay with them for a few weeks, just to recover. I didn't argue. I packed a small bag, and they moved me into a converted garage apartment attached to their McMansion 3 towns over. They called it the guest suite. I called it a gilded cage, and I began to watch. The first week I did almost nothing but sleep. I ate dry cereal from the box. I walked around their manicured subdivision full of identical stucco facades and felt hollow. But slowly I started noticing things. The speed of the paperwork, the neatness of everything, the way Marcus avoided letting me see any correspondence from the museum. He had told me he'd email me a copy of the final contract, but never did. When I asked about the $45,000, he wrote me a check from a business account I didn't recognize, not a personal account, and told me to wait a week before depositing it because the funds were still settling from the escrow. I played along. I acted foggy, forgetful, compliant. I let Camille think I was still in a grief fog so thick I couldn't tie my own shoes. I let Marcus talk about the money like a generous gift, but I never spent a dime of that check. I deposited it into a high-yield savings account at a completely different bank than the one I normally used and left it there, untouched, because I didn't trust the source. And I started keeping a small notebook, logging dates, times, snippets of conversation, anything that seemed off. The undercover investigation unfolded over the next several months, and it became the most meticulous electrical wiring job I'd ever done, except the circuits were human and the voltage was fraud. I lived in their guest apartment rent-free, which they mentioned constantly as evidence of their generosity, but it gave me full access to their home. I started noticing financial red flags everywhere. Marcus would take calls in his home office, door closed, and then emerge looking pale, snapping at Camille about cash flow timing. I heard the phrase balloon payment muttered with a kind of desperate hatred. Stacks of unopened credit card bills accumulated on the kitchen island, thick envelopes from American Express and Chase. One morning I overheard Camille on speakerphone with a Mercedes dealership, her voice strained, saying, "Look, the lease payment will be there by Friday. I just need a 3-day extension. Please don't initiate repossession." Their entire lifestyle, the BMW, the McMansion, the catered parties, was a ticking debt bomb. I began timing their arguments. Tuesday evenings after the mail came were always bad. I noted everything in my notebook using my own shorthand. Then one afternoon, Camille asked me to fix a tripped breaker because the basement lights had gone out, and Marcus was useless with anything requiring a screwdriver. I went down to the basement panel, a 200-amp square D that should have been upgraded a decade ago, and as I was resetting the breaker, I noticed a shred bin near the door of Marcus's office. It was overflowing with cross-cut confetti. Among the glossy real estate flyers, I saw a torn fragment with the museum's letterhead. My heart kicked. I scooped out an armful of the shredded paper, stuffed it into a plastic grocery bag, and carried it back to my apartment. That night, I spread the entire mess across my kitchen table and began the slow work of reconstruction. As an electrician, I'd spent years rewiring control cabinets with hundreds of identical tiny white wires, each one numbered, and you couldn't afford a single mistake. The patience that teaches you is transferable. I sorted the shreds by paper color and texture. I grouped them by the direction of the cross-cut fibers because modern shredders leave a distinctive chevron pattern that you can use to align edges. I taped them onto sheets of wax paper with archival mending tape I bought at an art supply store. Over 3 nights, working under a bright task lamp until my back ached, I reassembled 6 documents. What emerged was a map of cascading fraud. The first document was a wire transfer confirmation from the museum's bank, showing a deposit of $90,000 into an account I didn't recognize. I later traced that account number to a shell company Marcus had registered in Delaware under the name Prescott Legacy Holdings, with only himself listed as a signatory. The second was another wire transfer of $10,000 into his personal checking, categorized as consulting fee. These were separate from the $90,000, so he was skimming on top of the sale. The third was the actual bill of sale filed with the museum. My signature was on it, but it was a clumsy forgery. I'd seen my own signature on 100 electrical permits, and I know the way my hand drags on the bottom loop of the L. This forgery had no drag, just a smooth, rounded shape that looked like someone had traced it slowly. The notarization block was stamped and signed by a notary named Barbara Fulmer. I looked her up on the State Secretary of State's website. Her commission was issued 5 years ago, and her business address was the same real estate office where Marcus had worked. She had conveniently moved to Florida 3 months before the sale. The fourth document was a letter from the museum director, expressing gratitude for the generous donation and confirming that the entire collection would be displayed in the Marcus and Camille Prescott wing, with a plaque honoring our father. They'd framed it as a philanthropic donation to get a tax write-off, but the museum had paid cash under the table, and the $90,000 was far below market value. The fifth document was worse, an email from Marcus to Camille, dated 2 weeks before our father died. It read, "Once the old man is gone, we'll liquidate the glass and clear at least $150 in cash, after giving Lena 20% to keep her quiet. I've already lined up a buyer who doesn't ask questions." He had planned it before Dad's body was cold. My hands stopped shaking after about 30 minutes. Fear and grief evaporated into something cold and professional. I needed the originals, not just shredded reconstructions. I knew Marcus kept a locking filing cabinet in his office, a 4-drawer lateral Hahn cabinet with a tubular key lock. I'd seen it open once when he was rummaging for a property survey. Tubular locks are common on office furniture, and they are laughably easy to pick if you know the technique. When I was a second-year apprentice, I moonlighted for 6 months as an assistant to a commercial locksmith, doing rekeys on office buildings. He taught me that a tubular lock can be defeated with a ballpoint pen shell and a feeler pick made from the spring steel of a windshield wiper insert. I still carried a small pick set in my electrical tool bag, wrapped in a chamois. The next time Marcus and Camille left for a charity wine tasting, I walked into the house, pulled the pick set from my bag, and knelt in front of the filing cabinet. I inserted the tubular tension wrench, applied gentle rotational pressure with my thumb, and began feeling the pins with the ball-tipped pick, one by one, until they all set at the shear line. The core turned with a soft click, and the drawer rolled open. Inside, the manila folder was labeled Legacy Holdings, Collection Liquidation. I found the original forged bill of sale with my laughably bad forged signature, a sworn affidavit from Marcus claiming the collection had no significant market value, which was perjury given the appraisal. The acquisition contract with the museum that explicitly required notarized consent from both heirs, and a photocopy of the signed authorization I had given him, which he had used as a decoy to show the museum proof of my agreement while the actual bill of sale bore a forgery. I photographed every page with my phone, careful to capture the edges of the documents to show they weren't cropped. Then I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it and relocked the cabinet. I now had digital evidence of felony forgery, fraud, and conversion, and I hadn't left a single trace. But I was still living in their house, still legally powerless without a plan. That's when the ally appeared. I found the museum's website and navigated to Provenance and Legal, where a name caught my eye. Gloria Chen, Compliance and Acquisitions Officer. I sent her an email from a burner account I created on a library computer, attaching a few of the photos and simply stating, "You are displaying stolen property acquired through forgery. Your contract is void. Check the notary and the true will." A week later, I received a reply. "Whoever you are, we need to talk. I'm a registrar with 20 years of experience, not a cop, but if what you say is true, This museum is exposed to a massive lawsuit and potential federal charges under the National Stolen Property Act. I'm willing to help if you're legitimate. We met at a diner exactly halfway between her office and my town. Gloria Chen was a woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense blonde bob and a pair of glasses on a chain. She pulled out a laptop and showed me the museum's acquisition paperwork alongside the photos I'd sent. She explained the legal architecture with the precision of a forensic accountant. Under the Uniform Commercial Code, a sale of assets by a co-owner without proper consent constitutes conversion, and any contract based on fraudulent misrepresentation is void ab initio, meaning void from the beginning. Title never passed to the museum. Legally, the signs were still mine as trustee of the estate. Then she told me something that rewired my entire understanding of the case. She had pulled the public probate records, and my father's will contained a little-known provision called a testamentary trust. When he had the collection appraised 2 years earlier, his lawyer drafted a clause creating a temporary trust for the signs, naming me as the sole trustee with the exclusive power to authorize any sale or transfer. Marcus, as a secondary beneficiary, had no independent power under the trust. The joint consent language was a surface-level red herring. The trust terms required my active, notarized signature on a museum-specific consent form, which was the one he had forged. My father had seen this coming. He had designed a legal dead man's switch, and he had made me the key. Gloria and I formed a quiet alliance. She was furious on behalf of her profession, enraged that Marcus had used a museum to launder a theft. She needed my help to gather final proof for the museum's board so they could preempt liability and cooperate with law enforcement. I provided full resolution digital copies of the will, the forged bill, the shredder reconstitutions, and my father's handwritten warning. Gloria hired a forensic document examiner, a retired FBI specialist named Dennis, who compared the forged signature to known exemplars from my electrical permits, and concluded, with 98% certainty, that the museum document was a tracing. He also identified that the notary seal impression on the forged bill did not match Barbara Fulmer's registered stamp, meaning the stamp itself may have been replicated. Gloria traced the notary through state records, contacted her in Florida, and Barbara, confronted with a potential felony charge for notary fraud, admitted she had pre-signed a stack of blank notarized pages for Marcus years ago as a favor, and had no idea he'd used one for a bill of sale. That admission alone was enough to sink him. The evidence was now beyond airtight, but I needed one last piece of personal knowledge. I needed to know that no molecule of human decency remained in my brother, so I could act without guilt. I staged a medical emergency. I had a history of mild vasovagal syncope, nothing scary, but Marcus knew about it because we'd shared a childhood and he'd seen me faint once at a county fair. One evening while they were both home, I walked into their cathedral-ceilinged living room, clutched my chest, made a choked gasp, and collapsed theatrically onto the Persian rug right in front of the television. I let my breathing turn ragged, my eyes flutter. I waited for them to call 911, to kneel down, to express even a flicker of concern. Camille looked up from her architectural digest and said, "Oh my God, what's wrong with her?" Marcus stood up from his leather recliner. He did not come to me. He stepped over my body, his loafer almost touching my outstretched hand, and picked my phone up from the coffee table where I had deliberately left it unlocked. He said, in a voice devoid of anything but irritation, "If she's having an actual episode, we can't have her calling anyone and messing up the museum gala. The plaque unveiling is next month. Just let her ride it out." Camille, to her minimal credit, said, "Shouldn't we call 911? And Marcus actually replied, "No hospitals, too many questions. She's probably just being dramatic. Lena, get up, you're fine." He nudged my foot with his shoe, not a kick exactly, but a dismissive prod. I lay there, my heartbeat now utterly steady and very slow, and I felt every filament of familial love that had ever bound me to my twin sever with the clean snap of a cold glass tube. I faked a gradual recovery, mumbled about low blood sugar, and retreated to my apartment. That night I did not cry for the brother I lost. I cried for the sister who finally, belatedly, saw the truth, and I resolved to burn his scheme to the ground with the same methodical care my father used to rebuild neon signs. The confrontation was choreographed for maximum impact and minimum escape. The museum had scheduled a black tie grand opening gala for the new vintage neon wing, with donors, board members, local press, and a short speech from Marcus about family legacy. He and Camille dressed like they were walking a red carpet, Marcus in a rented tuxedo, Camille in a gown that I later learned was leased and would be repossessed within weeks. They insisted I attend, because they needed the grieving sister in the photographs to authenticate the wholesome narrative. I agreed sweetly, the broken little Lena they'd trained me to be. We drove up in their BMW, the leather still smelling new over the sour note of Max's anxiety sweat. The museum was a converted Packard dealership, all glass walls and polished concrete. The new wing was a cathedral of neon. I saw my father's soul glowing in every sign. The 1939 Lucky Strike script he spent 3 months restoring, the animated golfer from a putt-putt course, whose swinging club he rebuilt tube by tube after a hailstorm shattered it, a massive blue arrow from the long-demolished Desert Mirage Motel that he had personally salvaged from a demolition site using a borrowed crane. And on the wall, under a theatrical spotlight, was a polished brass plaque that read, "The Henry James Collection, donated in memory by his son Marcus Prescott and his wife Camille Prescott." No mention of me, no mention of the forgery, just their names, polished and permanent. Marcus gathered the crowd of maybe 60 people around a podium. He tapped the microphone, smiled his cap-tooth smile, and began a rehearsed tribute about legacy, preservation, and the importance of giving back. I let him talk for exactly 90 seconds, counting the seconds in my head like I used to count bombarder cycle times. Then I walked calmly to the podium, my low heels clicking on the concrete, and stood beside him holding a manila envelope thick with documents. The room went quiet, a confused rustle. Marcus's smile faltered, his eyes cutting to the envelope. I leaned into the microphone, my voice steady and quiet, and said, "My brother has just told you about his generosity, but he forgot to mention that this entire collection was acquired through a forged document. He forged my signature on a bill of sale to a museum that required my notarized consent under a testamentary trust created by our father. The contract is void ab initio, which means void from the very beginning. Title never transferred. These signs belong to me as trustee of the estate, and I have not consented." Marcus made a grab for the envelope, his face draining to the color of spoiled milk, but I held it behind my back. I continued, "The police are outside with a warrant for his arrest on charges of felony forgery, fraud, and grand theft by conversion. The museum's board of directors is about to receive a full evidentiary package, including a forensic document examination by a former FBI analyst and a sworn statement from the notary who confessed to pre-signing blank pages. There's also an email from 2 weeks before our father died, in which Marcus outlined this very plan." I turned to him. His mouth was opening and closing without sound. I said, loudly enough for the reporters to catch, "You didn't share anything with me, Marcus. You just shared a forgery. But I'm sharing something with you now, the full weight of a criminal prosecution." At that moment, 2 plainclothes detectives entered with Gloria and the museum director, and Marcus was handcuffed right there under the buzzing neon, the horror on his face reflected in the ruby glow of a restored 1940s diner clock. Camille started shrieking about lawyers and defamation, but a female detective gently took her arm and began asking questions. I never raised my voice. I just took back what was mine, and the room, after a stunned silence, erupted in camera shutters. The aftermath was methodical because I made it methodical. Marcus was charged in state court with second-degree forgery, felony fraud, and grand theft by conversion. The evidence was so overwhelming that his public defender, after one look at the forensic document analysis, advised him to plead. He eventually pled guilty to 2 counts, and the judge sentenced him to 4 years in state prison, with the last 3 years suspended to 5 years of supervised probation. The court also ordered full restitution in the amount of the original appraisal, $245,000, but by that time, Marcus and Camille were financially obliterated. The criminal case exposed their debts. The McMansion was foreclosed. The BMW and the leased Mercedes repossessed, their credit wrecked. Camille, ever the survivor, filed for divorce within a year, citing irreconcilable differences, though her real motivation was to distance herself from the liability. She moved to another state and now works as a receptionist for a dental practice, a far cry from the curated lifestyle she once performed. Marcus, released after 16 months for good behavior on the inside, walked out into a world where his real estate license was permanently revoked. His bank accounts were empty, and his only marketable skill was the ability to lie convincingly, which no longer worked. He got a studio apartment next to a highway and took odd jobs assembling furniture for a big box store. But the civil side of the story is where things got truly satisfying. I filed a separate civil suit for conversion, seeking the full appraised value of the collection plus court costs and punitive damages. Because his criminal plea established liability, the judge granted a summary judgment for the full amount. Marcus was penniless, so a traditional monetary judgment was symbolic. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Alina who grew up in my neighborhood, proposed an alternative satisfaction mechanism to the court. Under the state's rules for civil judgments, a plaintiff can agree to a specific performance order in lieu of immediate monetary collection. We proposed that Marcus be required, for 7 years, to perform 8 hours of court-supervised community service every Saturday, which would consist of maintaining and polishing the neon signs at my beer garden. The judge, an old man who had once served on a zoning board with my father, read the proposal, looked over his glasses at Marcus, and said, "It seems poetic. I'll allow it provided the probation department supervises." So the order was filed. I didn't just want the signs back. I wanted to build a monument that would transmute the betrayal into something alive and public. With my electrical background and my father's restoration notebooks, I spent 18 months converting a derelict auto body shop on the edge of town, a space with 14-foot ceilings and a 3-phase electrical service that could handle the load. I personally demolished the old grease pits, poured a polished concrete floor, and installed 48 dedicated 20-amp circuits, each with its own dimmer so I could dial in the precise milliamps for every sign. I hung the signs according to my father's undocumented dream. The beer signs above the bar, the motel signs along the east wall where the sunset light would hit them through clerestory windows, the animals and palm trees in a cluster near the restrooms like a neon menagerie. I wired the whole system through a panel of magnetic contactors and touchscreen controllers so I could turn on each sign individually or sequence them in a programmed light show. The Pabst Blue Ribbon waterfall went above the taps, on a hinged mount I designed so it could be lowered for cleaning. I named the place Broken Trust Beer Garden. The name is on the zinc bar top, on the coasters, on the staff aprons, and etched into a glass panel above the register, next to a reproduction of my father's handwritten note. "Protect it. It is your future." We opened on a Saturday in May. The line stretched around the block, and every Saturday at noon, exactly as the order requires, Marcus arrives in a county-issued orange safety vest, carrying his bucket and cloths, a probation officer named Rita trailing him with a clipboard. He climbs the ladder, unhooks the Pabst sign, and spends 8 hours polishing glass and porcelain while people drink IPA and tell their own stories of family betrayal. It is not a punishment I gloat over, not anymore. It is simply justice made visible, a tangible equilibrium. Last week, a customer, a young woman with a notepad who said she was a journalism student, asked me if I ever feel guilty, humiliating my own brother so publicly. I pointed at the small framed copy of the forged bill of sale that hangs on the wall next to the brass plaque that once honored him. "He forged my name to steal our father's life work and leave me to take the fall," I said. "I'm just making sure he polishes that glass until he understands what it means to build something instead of take it. Every stroke of the cloth pays down a debt that money can't discharge." The student raised her glass, a wheat beer the color of argon glow, and I poured myself a seltzer. The real lesson isn't about revenge. It's about integrity as a daily practice, about boundaries that are stronger than blood, and about the fact that sometimes the best way to save yourself is to build a shrine out of what they tried to break and fill it with light. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if you believe the best revenge is a beer garden with perfect lighting and a court-ordered janitor, hit that like button and subscribe. Ring the bell so you don't miss the next story. This is Lena, signing off from behind a bar that never dims.